From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today is the leader of the free skydiving world. Albert Berchtold is the executive director for the United States Parachute Association, and his journey through the sport has been nothing short of extraordinary. Hailing from Vineland, New Jersey, Albert took his inaugural leap into the world of skydiving in 1999 at Air Ohio in Rittman. Now, with over 6,000 jumps under his belt, he has soared through numerous drop zones across the Mideastern and Northeastern states, calling places like Skydive Cross Keys in New Jersey and later DeLand, Florida, his skydiving home. But Albert's impact isn't just limited to time spent in the air. He has dedicated over a decade to the marketing department at Performance Designs and passionately steered the Florida Canopy Piloting Association, whether contributing to the U.S. Canopy Piloting team or guiding policies on the ground. Albert's blend of professional expertise and genuine passion has left an indelible mark on the sport. Welcome to the 20-Minute Call, my friend, Albert Berchtold.
Hey, James. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Albert. How are you?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for being here. I want to start out very untraditionally by saying that I'm looking at you, and I've known you to look this way, your handsome self, for many, many years. And where we have shared is somewhat of a thinning hairline, but I understand that you used to have like long hair and sort of like live on a drop zone. Can you give us insight to the young Albert Berchtold versus the executive director of the United States Parachute Association?
Yeah, there was a time in my life, like many in our sport, when I lived on a drop zone in a trailer and ate ramen noodles and hung out in the woods and went swimming in the drop zone swimming pool. And there was a point when I had long hair down past my shoulders as well. The Fabio waving bleach blonde hair. But those days are in the past now, I guess. It would look kind of funny now. It would be like the reverse mullet.
So you're originally from New Jersey. Tell me, how is it that you got into skydiving? What was that first jump? What led you to the drop zone for the first time?
Well, yeah, originally from Vineland, New Jersey, South Jersey, which makes me a Philly fan. And I went to school in Delaware. And shortly after getting out of school, I took a job as a compliance auditor, and I had my first assignment out in Ohio. Marion, Ohio is where I was. And I had this new thing called disposable income. And that was a new thing from being a poor college kid. And they would fly the auditors. New auditors would fly home one weekend a month, and the other 3 weekends you were in whatever town you were in. And I happened to be in Marion, Ohio, where the most exciting thing to do there was the Applebee's on a Friday night. So about a month into my assignment there, I decided, hey, I'm going to go skydiving. So I punched up the internet and I found a local drop zone, a little place called Air Ohio. That was about an hour away from where I was. And I drove over there and started my skydiving journey with sitting through an 8-hour ground school and doing an AFF jump.
I should say that it's interesting that you would make your first jump at Air Ohio, owned by Sherry Butcher, who has been a national director and various different roles in USPA. Does she remember you when you came for the first time?
When I first started there, I met a lot of folks who I would come to know further on in my skydiving career. Sean, who worked down at CPS, Peter, who's still up there in that area doing instructing. There was another guy, and I can't think of his name, older guy instructor, always had a cigarette in his mouth. And you'd be on a creeper, and he'd have you arching and you're practicing arching and he's kind of leaned over next to you, you're focused on breathing, and he's puffing cigarette smoke. And I'm sure if I said that, Sherry would blurt out his name like that, but I can't remember his name. I would come to meet some of those folks again through my skydiving career, and I would come to see Sherry again, turn back around 15 years later, running for the board and meeting her there when I ran for regional director, and I think it was 2011 or 12 was my first year on the board. And she kind of remembered me, but not really at the time. I was one of those AFF students that showed up, and I went through AFF there. And no sooner did I finish the traditional AFF program and get cleared for self-supervision, to where they would let you go make a solo by yourself, that I got transferred to another location for my job. So at the time, I was one of those people who just finished AFF and then stopped skydiving, right? And I'm sure we've all seen them at different drop zones. They either finish AFF, or some people get to their A license and then they disappear, right? And I could only assume, as I thought years later, that they probably assumed I was one of those people who just finished AFF and then just quit the sport altogether. But, fast forward 13 years later, I would meet her again and be on the board.
Tell me the role of a compliance auditor. It sounds like, and forgive me for the compliance auditors that may be listening, but it doesn't sound exciting. It sounds, as you've described in conversations we've had previously, like, being on the road and in quiet towns, auditing businesses. Was it enjoyable to you, or is it the occupation that led you to quitting that job altogether?
Yeah, so I did that for a few years. The company I worked for was a company out of Schaumburg, Illinois, and I did compliance auditing for newspapers and magazines. And it was an independent third-party organization that was made up of newspapers and magazines and advertisers. And what they did was, this company would go in as an independent third party and audit the financial and circulation and demographic records of a magazine and newspaper for the purpose of reporting, to create honest exchange between media and advertisers. And that was the purpose of that organization. Yeah, you spent a lot of time in small towns out in the middle of nowhere, because a lot of the work you did would be sometimes at a publisher, but a lot of the times at a fulfillment center, which was a company that maintained the subscription records and financial records for those magazines. When you get a little slip of paper in a magazine and you say, I'd like to subscribe for 1 year. Well, guess what? I was the guy who was digging through those a year later to make sure that the people who the magazine said subscribed actually did subscribe. And then I would trace those all the way back to the payment you made for whatever it was, $66 to that magazine, to make sure that it was a legitimate subscription. I mean, I found it, I went to school for accounting, so auditing seemed like an interesting thing to do. And I did that for a few years with them. And then eventually, I guess I was decent at it, because one of our clients in New York City ended up hiring me to run their circulation and distribution at a publishing company. So I moved to New York City. I got a small flat in Gramercy area, and it was kind of like, I was young. It was in my early 20s, and I was living in the middle of New York City. It was great.
So why did you quit?
Well, it was, I was still jumping through that whole time, right? So while I was auditing, I was traveling around, and I went to different drop zones, and it was a bit unique, because most people, they start skydiving, and from what I saw once I was in the sport longer, people would start skydiving at a drop zone, and they would go through AFF, and they would, or whatever form of AFP they went through, and they would get their A license, and they would stay at that drop zone. And you'd have people who would skydive for years and years, and they would never leave the drop zone that was near their home. And in my case, before I had a year in the sport, I had already been to half a dozen drop zones because my job moved me around. I'd been to Delmarva in Delaware because I worked in the DC area, and I was at Cross Keys working in Philadelphia, and I went to the ranch. I was working in New York, and I went to CPI. And I mean, I had been to drop zones all over the Northeast. I was out in Detroit. I spent about 11 months in Detroit, and I'd gone to Napoleon, Mike Pelzer's place out there, their old location, which is now Midwest, Randy Allison's drop zone. So lots of different places. I enjoyed skydiving. I really got to love it. And all week I worked in an office in New York City, and I rode a skateboard to work. I would be in a suit half the time, riding a skateboard down the road. And it's funny, the publisher would walk down the hallway, and he was always kind of in his own world, and he'd walk. He was always walking really quick, and he was always on the phone talking to somebody. And I would walk in, and I'm wearing a nice expensive suit, and I got a skateboard under my arm, and he would walk past down the hallway. And at one point, he walked past, and then all of a sudden he backed up down the hallway, and he looked to the side, and he sees me coming in, and he looks at my face, and then he looks down at the skateboard, and then he looks back up, and then he turns his head back forward and walks on. I spent all week thinking about going to the drop zone and skydiving. Monday to Friday, all I did was think about what kind of jumps I was going to do that weekend, and who was going to be at the DZ, and how much fun I was going to have. And then Friday I would get on the train, and I'd leave the city and go pick up my car and drive either down to Cross Keys or up to the ranch, whichever I was going to that weekend. And then all weekend, all I would do was dread going back into the city, and I guess I enjoyed my time there, of course, living there, but I didn't really want to go back to work, right? I wanted to skydive more. Our family had a travel trailer that I asked my dad if I could take. And he said, sure. What do you want that old piece of junk for? It was 20 years old. And he said, sure. I said, I'm going to go park it in the woods in New Jersey and live in it on the weekends. And he gave me this funny look, the same look he gave me when I told him I was going to start skydiving. Eventually one day I just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I just quit. And I moved into that trailer in the middle of the woods in New Jersey, and that's where I went to live full time.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. Burble. Albert, just to pause there, you're working in a great job with an auditor, and what did your parents think? What's Albert getting into? Did they think he'll grow out of this? Where were they at with this?
My parents have always been supportive, right? If they've been nothing else, they've always been supportive of myself and my sister, always just following our dreams and doing what we wanted to do. My father was a high school biology teacher. My mom has had various jobs through her life. She worked in secretarial type roles. She worked in entertainment. She did all kinds of different things. They've always been supportive of me, no matter what I wanted to do. When I screwed up when I was younger, they were supportive. When I decided to quit my job and go live in a trailer, I'm sure my father was so excited, right? When I first get out of school and he's like, yes, my son graduated college. Yes, he's got a real job. He's going to go be an auditor and get into business. Yes, he's got a job in New York City. He's making great money, real job. He's doing great. And then you call him up and go, Dad, I'm going to quit that job and go live in the trailer in the woods. And I'm sure there was some point where he was just like, he'll figure it out, but they always supported me through it. They never said, you're crazy, that's stupid, don't do that. They've always been supportive. And, eventually it led somewhere.
Tell me about your sister. Is she ever skydived? What does she do?
She has never, she's never made a jump. I've tried to convince her, but she never has. She's 5 years older than me. She's a chemical engineer, and she's actually nearing retirement now. And my mom's made a jump. I managed to get her to jump out of an airplane not too long ago. I would say it was probably about 7 years ago, maybe. I got her to make a jump. She came down to DeLand and made a jump with. She actually jumped with my girlfriend at the time, Emily. Jumped with her. I had, I think, a broken ankle or so. I couldn't jump with her, but I was there on the ground when she landed. But Emily jumped with her.
And did she get it? Did she suddenly go, okay, I kind of get why my son's been doing this for so long?
I think she did. She definitely enjoyed it. And when she came down, she was pretty excited about it.
So you're daydreaming about skydiving all week, and you would eventually quit your job as an auditor. And you would do what most skydivers do that have careers, is at some point live in a camper van. We've got that covered. But then you started working at a gear store called Square 3 at the Drop Zone. And you were probably selling equipment, ordering things from the manufacturers. Could you have envisioned, while folding T-shirts for tandems in the gear store, that you would become the future executive director of USPA?
Yeah, initially when I left, I had thought, I had this crazy idea that I was going to start my own business. I actually started ordering books on franchises and small businesses. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll try and buy into a franchise, or I'll try and do something like that with the small amount of money I had saved up from working in the city. I said, maybe I'll start a coffee shop or an ice cream parlor or something like that. And I was searching for the type of franchise that would move me. There's plenty of, you can look into franchises and you'll find the ROI and you'll find all the math and all the numbers that tell you which one is the smartest business to get into, which one is the one that will be successful. But as I went and I searched through all of those, the one thing I didn't find is I didn't find the one that motivated me. I didn't find the one that was exciting. Right. And as much as all the numbers, being an accountant, I could look at it and go, yeah, that one will make me a bunch of money. None of them that I looked at triggered me to say, oh, that would be exciting and I would enjoy doing that. I think one of the reasons that it never really went anywhere in my life is because there's nothing on that side of things that ever really entertained me enough to say, I can see myself doing that every day. Because if you can't see yourself getting up and doing it every day, then it's just not going to work. Eventually it's going to fail if you don't love it.
Was there a franchise, though? Maybe it didn't excite you, but you're like, maybe. Was it like a Subway, or what would have piqued your interest then?
It's funny, as I sit here drinking this cup of coffee that I just made, the latte I just made for this talk. It was actually coffee shop was one of the ones that was probably the most entertaining to me. I mean, I looked at loads of stuff, house cleaning, commercial drying companies, you name it, framing businesses, all kinds of random oddball stuff that you would never even think of. And then you go, oh yeah, that obviously every town needs, somebody to do rugs, residential and commercial carpeting, right? All kinds of stuff like that. But I got about as close as I was going to with any of them with the concept of opening up a small coffee shop, but that never went anywhere. And I ended up working at, as you said, Square 3, which was a small retail gear store. It was part of the Square family, Square 1, Square 2, Square 3. And Mary Farwell was running it, and she needed some help and asked if I could come help out and be the, assistant manager of the store or whatever it was. Basically somebody who could come in and open and close and knew how to counter register and make the books balance where needed. And I got to know a lot about skydiving. I got to meet all the students, right? Because when they finished and they got to self-supervision and they got through AFF, they would come over and they needed to rent gear, right? They needed to try new things out. I got really good at, introducing them to different containers and different altimeters and different parachutes and what was the difference and who liked what and why. And I got to, on the opposite side, I got to meet all the manufacturers. I got to eventually get to the point where I was ordering containers and measuring people and ordering parachutes and ordering AADs and sending AADs back for servicing and all that kind of fun stuff. I was still at that point thinking that was, working in that gear store was just kind of a stopgap to entertain for a while I decided what I wanted to do next with my life, other than just hang out at the DZ and jump out of planes, even though I was having a great time doing that. Eventually, the different tours from the different manufacturers would come around. And one of those was Performance Designs. Cola and Isaiah were there at the time, and I had met them one summer, and they called me up in the winter and said, "Hey, we need a tour rep for next summer, and we're going to hire somebody to go tour around in California, and we're going to hire somebody to tour around in the East Coast, and we want to see if you want to, come work for PD and tour around the East Coast and go to the different drop zones, that most of which I already knew because I had either met people from those drop zones working in the gear store, or I had visited them because, everything in the Northeast is relatively close in comparison to like West Coast drop zones where everything's a lot farther apart. We'd go up to a different DZ for a weekend and just hang out up there if they were having a boogie. They said, well, it's a 6-month job, and at the end of 6 months, you're out. That's it. End of the contract. You don't work for the company anymore. And I said, oh, it sounds like fun, right? It seems like the dream job for somebody who's in skydiving, right? You get to travel around and go to a bunch of boogies, and I would come to find that it was one of the most difficult jobs I ever did in my entire life. It was another point in my life where I had to make a decision. I had to give up the comfortable spot I was in, working at the gear store in my little trailer, which I had built. By that point, I had built a deck around it and an outside shower, and it was a nice little pad I had there. I had the opportunity to take a chance on this interesting opportunity that in 6 months was essentially over. It was, again, another point where I kind of took a leap of faith and said, okay, I'll do it.
What are the realities of being a tour rep? Because, I remember being a young jumper at the drop zone, and, the tour reps would roll in, and you'd look at that going, they are living the quote unquote dream. They get to travel around and come to all these skydiving events and meet all these people. But as you said, it was very hard work. And of course, now I've been in the industry for a while, it's a grind. What do I not know? Or what do people generally not know about being a tour rep?
Imagine being on tour with a rock band, right? Everybody looks at that and goes, wow, you're a roadie with who? That's awesome. You get to travel around and see all the concerts, and you get to hear them play live. All the band members. That's amazing. That's such a cool gig. Well, guess what? That's not the guy who's hanging out partying with the band members. He's the guy who shows up, sets up the stage, does all the sound, and then the band members play. And then when the band members leave to go party, then it's your job to go break everything down and put it all away. Right? So, yeah, you're on the road. Yeah, and then you go hop in a trailer and you hope to catch a few Z's before you get to the next town. You have to set up the stage again. It's glamorous from the outside, but on the inside, it's a tough gig. I guess what it looks like from the outside is you get to go to all the boogies, and all you have to do is hook up a couple parachutes or loan out a couple rigs. But the truth is you are representing the company in the field, and that comes with everything. You become the face of that organization, whichever organization it might be. And you can do that job. It's like any job, right? You can take it seriously and you can do it very well, or you can kind of half-ass it and do it very poorly. But really it's more than just with PD. It was about, one, it's liaising with customers. It's talking to them, trying to figure out, not necessarily just hooking a parachute up, but figuring out what parachute is actually going to help that person. And which one is the right one for them. And a lot of the time it's changing the person's mind on what they think might be right for them into what is actually going to bring them enjoyment in skydiving. Because just because the guy down the street likes X canopy doesn't mean you're going to like X canopy. The other thing is you find yourself helping out troubled customers, people who have a problem with the product. And, they might not call or email the company when the rep for the company is standing right there in front of them. A lot of the time they'll walk over and they'll give them a peace of mind, and you have the opportunity to blow that off or help make that person change that person's opinion and maybe change their opinion of the company. I always found that just trying to do the right thing was always usually the right thing for the organization I worked for. If somebody came over and they were jumping a parachute from another company and they were having a problem with their deployments, I've had so many people come over and go, "Hey, I'm tired of this parachute from this other company. What do you have to demo?" And my first instinct wasn't to give them a new parachute, wasn't to give them a parachute from my company, because chances are, in most cases, it's not the parachute that's screwing up. It's usually something that the person's doing with it. So I would find myself giving packing lessons to people with parachutes from other manufacturers pretty regularly. I'd walk through deployment sequences with them. I'd help them pack their Icarus or Aerodyne or whatever the other company was. Because truthfully, if they're having a problem with that company's product and I get them switched onto mine, they're probably going to have the same problem with my product. Because if they're doing something wrong with deployment or packing, that's not going to change just because they changed the parachute. The root cause and the root problem is still there. So there are more people. I helped loads of people learn how to pack, or I worked on their deployment with another company's parachute to where I would even pack it for them. And they would come back and they go, "Wow, that opened great that time. What'd you do?" And now I've got their attention. Now they're listening. And I would send people away happy as a clam with somebody else's parachute, and knowing that it's a long game, right? Eventually, that guy's going to decide to buy something new or something different. And my hope is that he'll look at it and go, "You know what? That guy from PD was pretty awesome. Let me see what they've got." And down the road, maybe they end up purchasing something from the company. But ultimately, it's about doing the right thing for the community.
It sounds like, based on that answer, that you were a great tour rep representing Performance Designs, which I would say was and is still regarded as such a premium brand in the industry. And I've seen many tour reps on the road that don't really represent they don't think like they're there representing their brand, or they do from boogie hours, where they're doing demos. And then, when the beer light comes on, the boogie, the representative hat comes off, and I've seen that. And of course, that's not necessarily the case. You're still being judged.
Yeah, sure. You can take the company shirt off, and you can think you take the hat off, but when you go to that party, you're still wearing that hat. You still represent the company. You can still be there having a beer with everybody in the evening, but know that even though you think, the clock ended at 5:00, you're still working. In their eyes, in every person's eyes there, you're still the representative of that company, and they're still looking at you, and they're still seeing what you do. And that doesn't mean you got to, go to bed at 9:00. But you will be expected to be up at 8 a.m. at the tent, ready for the guy who did go to bed at 9:00, and he's there ready to talk about equipment and maybe demo something or needs help packing or whatever else. And as much as the guys want you there in the evening, hang out with and talk and drink a beer and do what you need to do on that end, you also have to be ready and able to do your job at 8 a.m. the next morning when everybody starts showing up, because the guy who shows up at 8 probably wasn't up late. He's probably not hungover, and he probably doesn't want to smell the liquor on your breath the next morning either. So you kind of have to play both sides of that, and you have to learn to do it tactfully. If not, you can burn out pretty quick.
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to invite you to be a member of a budding community with me on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests and gain access to some show swag. It's pretty sweet. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. If you're a young person and you're a tour rep on the road on the boogie circuit, what you're saying really requires self-discipline and a little bit of maturity, because it's hard when you're on the road, and certainly when the beer light comes on, it is very festive. Based on what you said, though, sounds like you were a great rep, as I said earlier, to the point that they would hire you full-time in the marketing department. Before we get there, though, what's going through my mind is, and pardon the stereotype, Albert, but when I think of an auditor's brain, at least the auditors, or rather accounting types that I've met, part of the calculus is, as you look at your numbers and you digest what's good, what's bad, is to have sort of the security. And what I find interesting about you is, and I'm trying to figure it out in your personality, like, where does this come from? This level of comfort without security. Hey, I'm an auditor. Okay, now I'm going to completely quit my job, that thing that I studied and went to school for, to go live in a van, a camper at the drop zone and work in the store. Not that there's anything wrong living in the store, but when you've got that type of financial security living in New York City, then, hey, we're going to offer you this job to be a tour rep, but we can only offer it to you for 6 months. Ooh, what do I do after that? I don't know. We may or may not have something for you. Okay, sure. I'll go with it. Can you explain to me where that level, or am I just stereotyping? Because I just feel like usually there's a calculation of going, I've got this set up so that by this age, I'll be in this position with a role like yours, because you're data crunching.
Yeah, I mean, my mind always does that. I think the math, if I do this and, how that works out and what the numbers look like, and that my mind naturally kind of does that. But I mean, I also think sometimes I listen to my heart and do what that tells me to do. And I guess it's a mix of both, really. Just because the numbers 1 + 1 says you go here doesn't always mean that that's the right thing to do. And it doesn't always mean that's the right thing for you. And I guess there's times in my life when, 1 + 1 said you do this, but if I look further ahead, I realize that doesn't take me where I want to go. And it doesn't take me to a place that's going to have me enjoy getting up every day and doing whatever it is I'm doing with my day. So sometimes I follow that as well and try and make that work. I think I've been fortunate and maybe a little bit lucky, and that it's played out the way it has.
I think, as you say that, following our hearts versus the status quo approach is the risk. It's risky to follow your heart or your passion. I suppose, it's overused in skydiving in terms of get out of your comfort zone, but it really is, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or follow the passion of, hey, I got security over here with being an auditor, but I really love skydiving. And to make a career in skydiving, not as an instructor, is even a different, more challenging path, I think, because there's not as many opportunities.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, when I started, I never would have thought I was going to go work for, a leading manufacturer in the sport. And I didn't even know what USPA was, let alone that they had a board and they had staff and anything like that. Didn't really know anything about that. But eventually that's where life would lead me, because, that's where it all seemed to go.
You would eventually join Performance Designs, and you would be in the marketing department with various roles for 14 years.
Yeah.
And I want to share a story. When I was a young drop zone manager and young in the sport, I remember taking a meeting with you in DeLand. Mm-hmm. And I think you took us to the Thai restaurant there.
Yeah, I love that place.
Yeah, it was myself and my DZO, Danny Smith.
Yeah.
And, Performance Designs has such a premium brand that to get FaceTime with someone like you meant a lot. I don't know if it occurred to you that, hey, I'm just meeting with, drop zone customers that order from us. But we didn't at that time, certainly, order lots of canopies. But I remember you treating us very well. And it was so exciting for me too, because when you walk into PD, it is like a level of organization and professionalism. Like when you go up on the balcony and you look out on the manufacturing floor, it's like, wow, and you feel so good. What was it like for you on day one of joining that premium brand, going, whoa, I'm with one of the leading manufacturers in the world? What was day one of your job like there? Do you remember that?
I remember the first time I went there was actually before I started touring. I went down to DeLand for about 2 weeks to train. Right, I went down. I met everyone in marketing. I met everyone in engineering. Met all the facility management, and really got to know the brand really well. I got to know who the different people were in the organization and how it worked, so I would be able to represent the company in the field. I learned who to contact for what challenges I might come across, and I learned as much as I could in that short time frame about the actual products. What Canopy does what and why. And I was going to have to be able to teach people about that. And also, when I was down there, I spent time jumping all of those canopies. And that was something that was pretty important when I was there and I worked there, was that the people who were going to be representing the brand, for anything that they had the skill level to jump, they should experience it. They should understand it, because you can obviously talk about the equipment by reading the papers and reading the flight characteristics documents and all that. But if you can actually have said, yes, I've jumped that, and this is, I understand you and I understand what you're saying, it's a lot easier to have a discussion about it. You had mentioned coming down there and saying that it was amazing to get FaceTime with someone from the company. But from the other side of the coin, I mean, I certainly didn't feel like anyone who was unapproachable or unreachable. I certainly didn't seem like we were this massive company. To all of us there, it was very much we were just part of the skydiving community, right? Even all the way up to Bill, the owner, and John, the vice president. Like, it was never, there's no one who wore a suit to work and sat in the corner office there. Bill showed up wearing T-shirts and jeans, sometime covered in cow shit from his farm, right? It was just a regular place with normal, real people in it. And remaining grounded like that, and grounded in the community, I think made a big difference, because it was never, we're PD and we're bigger and better and badder. It's, the company's only as good as the people who work at it and the people who surround it and the community and how much they care about it. For me, it was just like meeting another person in the skydiving community and seeing what we could do to work together and grow each other's respective businesses together. And yeah, I spent a long time there, about 14 years, doing various jobs in the department, and eventually taking on managing the department after a number of years after I'd kind of done everything else there.
Take me behind the scenes at, say, PD marketing, because I've always admired the kind of marketing that PDs put out, whether it be with the swag or what you all would give out at a PIA symposium. I remember, pint glasses, which, with the PD logo etched in the side, which is not like revolutionary, but at scale, at how many mugs or rather glasses you get. I mean, you all were just very forward thinking. And I always just imagined the marketing department to have your own large sort of offices, and it just seemed like a cool place to be, where you all were spinning up great ideas. It felt like that, at least outwardly. During your time there, you all released many different products, and all those products require names and then marketing. I always remember when you guys put out the Valkyrie, of how creative and cool it was, from the name to the marketing of it. But what is that process like? Because canopies take so many years before they're ready for use by the general public, and then marketing that falls into your lap. Can you just share some insights to that?
Yeah, it was definitely a fun department, and it would be larger or smaller in size over the years. And everything there, I mean, the factory floor was very regimented. Everything was worked out. Everybody had a job to do. There were crit books on the floor that told people exactly how to sew, where to sew, what the tolerance was for every product and every size, and this measured down to the millimeter, and everything was precise. And then there were the marketing folks who were just, we were more, as well as the folks in engineering, there was a lot more of an open environment and thinking and collaboration and imagination, right? And on the engineering side, it's imagination of how do we get a parachute to do this? And they would bounce ideas off each other and design different things and then go and jump them. And in marketing, we were involved in some of that, but we were also involved in, well, what is it we want to do, and trying to dream how to represent the company and how to make a difference in the community and how to impact and see and be seen. And some of those meetings, we would go into a meeting room and, like, for instance, naming, you said, we had a sheet of various names, and every canopy that would come along would have a project name in the R&D and engineering department. And that name is typically not what ended up on the product when it went to market, but marketing and engineering would end up working together on coming up with a product name. And that would happen at some point through development. And then we would have a list, and everybody would throw names on this list. And then we go, well, we can't use that. There was a parachute in the 70s named that used to fold up and kill people. Don't do that. Usually it was some of the guys that had been around, like John or Bill, would go, oh, yeah, you can't do that. There's a cargo parachute named after that, or whatever else. And eventually we'd come up with these names, and then we would create a short list. And then we would try and look at which one really fit, which one fit the product, which one fit the way it was going to be, the way it was desired to be perceived in the skydiving community. And then once we thought we had it, then it was like we'd try and stop. Like, don't come up with a final name, because the second you come up with a final name, somebody's going to say it, and then it's going to get out, right? And it was this trick of trying to keep it secret. And then you had to go and try and register the name and come up with a logo and register that also without anyone ever seeing it or knowing about it. That was always an interesting time, because everybody's like, nobody says the name. Like, okay, we have the name. Now put it away. Now don't use it again, right? Like, and somebody go, oh, hey, what do you think we should do with the Valkyrie? Oh, don't say Valkyrie. You know? Or Saber 3. Don't say Saber 3. You know? Even to the point where I think it was the Saber 3, or maybe the Pulse, when they were building them, and we were getting ready to release the product, and we were building the demo parachutes, and it was always a desire to try and build stock before we actually launched the product. So that way, when we launched the product, there would be a few of them in every size and every color on the stock list, available and ready to buy. But in order to do that, you have to be able to build them. You have to build them in the factory, put logo panels on them, all while there's people walking through the same building doing tours. So how do you do that? There was one point where we had people coming through, and they had tacked pieces of fabric over the logo panel, because some of these canopies were hanging in final inspection, and we were trying to keep the name of the product secret while there's people walking through the factory. There was all kinds of stuff like that. There was a time when the folks from NZ Aerosports came over, and they were in the States, and Gyro came by and wanted to see he wanted to walk through the facility, and John took him on a tour. But like, before he could come through, there were pieces of paper covering everything in that place. It was like, anything that had anything written on it had a piece of blank white paper over it when he walked through. But we didn't want to say no. You know, he was a member of the skydiving community, right? And we wanted to invite him in and let him see. He wanted to see the massive factory that was PD. he enjoyed being a part of the community with with PD, and he always looked at PD and said, wow, they do cool stuff. And him and John would have discussions, and they would talk at PI all the time. They were great with that stuff. It was a group of fun people. We had a lot of work to do. There was hard stuff that had to be done, but we used to have fun too. There was one point, Robin Miller at the time now Robin Hawk used to work in the maintenance department. And she had an office underneath the stairwell when marketing was upstairs in the main building before they moved over to the building next door. And she worked in the little office underneath the stairs. And one day I went out and I took we had these big gigantic boxes, and I walked out and I took like 3 steps down the stairwell that was right over her office. And then I chucked the box down the stairwell and I let it tumble down the stairs, and I made a bunch of moaning noises like I had just fallen. And then the box goes tumbling down. And she came out from underneath the stairs. She's like, oh my God. And she's like yelling and screaming as she comes around the corner, and she sees the box sitting there. And then she looks up the steps, and the entire marketing department of like 7 or 8 people is standing at the top of the steps laughing their full head off. And like half the factory floor stopped working and looked over. We had fun. I got called into HR for that one. They didn't think it was very funny, but we had a blast. We had a blast. We had a lot of work to do, a lot of hard stuff to do, but we had a good time.
I think if you can enjoy or have fun in your job, you're going to be more creative and do, if you're having fun, you're going to do good things. Let's fast forward. You've been involved with USPA in various different roles since 2012. I think as a regional director and a national director, certainly as treasurer. Mm-hmm. Now you're the executive director. Been for almost 3 years, I think. Mm-hmm. For as long as I've known you, Albert, I've never seen you lose your cool. And maybe I just missed those, when that has happened. But do you get stressed out? Because you seem very calm.
Absolutely. I think everybody does. They just manage it differently. Yeah, I spent 8 years on the board of directors with USPA, 7 of those as the treasurer. And then I transitioned into this role as executive director just over 3 years ago. And I moved up to Fredericksburg with my wife and 2 kids, and we're enjoying it up here in Fredericksburg area. It's great. For us, it's moving back up into 4 seasons from having been in Florida for so long. And yeah, I have stress in my life like everyone does. And I will definitely say this job is more stressful than the one I had before. It's just knowing how to manage that in your life, knowing what you can control and what you can't control, and how to deal with those different stresses that are in your life and not let them consume you.
So how do you manage your stress?
Wow, that's a good question. Lots of deep breaths. I think I know that you can't change everything, but everything to me is just kind of understanding what's happening, what's going on, trying to take the time to talk with people. If it's a challenge with another person, understanding their point of view, where they're coming from, what it is that they're looking for, what it is they desire, and trying to work through whatever the situation is for the best interest of all parties involved. Truthfully, we're all here to do whatever it is we have to do in life, and to have fun and to enjoy life. And sometimes there are challenges that come along with that. Sometimes dealing with stress is just slowing down a little bit and trying to listen, and then trying to be heard. And I think a lot of the time everybody's in a rush to talk and be heard, and sometimes they forget to listen. And a lot of the times I think you can learn a lot by listening to others and not always talking. And I think sometimes that alone solves people's problems. Sometimes people just want to be heard. And if you take the time to listen and comprehend and digest and have a little empathy as to where they're coming from and why they feel the way they do, then some of the challenges and stresses in life can work themselves out.
for the skydivers out there that are just love skydiving and this is their escape, one may not be aware of what the executive director stresses out about as it relates to skydiving today. What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about for our sport?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I stress about with relation to our sport is, and I think the thing that we probably all have a little bit of control over, is the influence that we all have in this delicate community that we operate in. You know, you hear a lot of us talking about safety culture and things like that, and everything we do in this sport can be destroyed by one horrible act, right? We're only as good as the worst guy in the group. You know, one pilot who's acting inappropriately, flying the aircraft in a way he's not supposed to, and does something horrible can really ruin the party for everybody. Same thing when it comes to skydiving. One guy flying through the pattern to land his parachute in a way that's unsafe and without regard for the other people around him, being selfish in that manner, can really ruin the party for a lot of other people and a lot of our friends. So I think it's important. That's probably the biggest thing is understanding the impact that your actions have on everyone else around in this skydiving community. It makes a big difference. And we can really change the way we're all able to enjoy the sport of skydiving if we take into account that, you know, it's not all just about me. That's one of the things I think that takes a lot of my mental time. You know, one of the things we're fighting right now with proposed legislation has to do, and really I'd say the needle that kind of kicked it all off was the crash in Hawaii, right? And somebody had a misconception about what caused that. And it led to us now having a long 3-year-long battle that started right when I took this job of fighting unnecessary legislation. And it's been 3 years and many, many, many hours and many, many, many of our membership dollars to try and educate folks on Capitol Hill as to what it takes and what's needed and what's necessary and what isn't, and what will promote safety and what won't. That all started from one guy making a really, really bad mistake and all the people around him not taking steps to change that. So I think we all need to understand those things. That's probably what keeps me up the most. And we all hold the keys, right? There's 42,000 people in this association, and we all share it equally. You know, there are people who are elected to the board, and there are people who work here on staff, but ultimately it's our association together. And it exists because at some point many years ago, the skydivers decided that they needed a collective voice, and they created this organization to be that voice. And it still is to this day, for good or for bad. So we decide what that voice is going to be, what it sounds like, and whether it's for the betterment of the sport or the destruction of it. It's kind of the big thing, right? It's the big picture, I think.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. A major revenue generator that helps support drop zones is tandem. You know, when we've had various tandem accidents through the years, you know, there's the big concern, you know, if this keeps happening, the FAA is going to start making decisions for us rather than our organization being more self-governing, if you will. It's I've been hearing this for a while, but how does the FAA, in your perspective, view our sport? Do you think that they view us as a bunch of careless crazies jumping out of airplanes that need regulation, or you know, what is your take on their perspective of us?
Well, I think when we say the FAA, there's, the FAA is an organization that's made up of thousands of people, right? And we spend a fair amount of time communicating with various people in that organization. There's folks in Washington we spend a fair amount of time talking to. There's folks that they have in that organization that are devoted solely to aeronautic activities like skydiving. There are people in that organization that are located around the United States at various FSDOs who communicate directly with our drop zone owners. There's communication we have with them. And our goal is to ensure that the best interest of the public and our sport is taken into consideration when there's communication between the FAA and what they do. So I think in general, our relationship right now, and it's gone through waves. I would say in general right now, it's a pretty good relationship. We communicate with them pretty regularly. We don't always meet eye to eye on everything, but in general, I think they respect that our desire and interest is to do the right thing for all parties involved. We're not just looking out for skydiving. We understand that we are part of a bigger picture that is all of general aviation and all of the airspace involved with general aviation, commercial aviation, everyone using the airspace system. And we have to fit into that in a respectful manner and understand that we have a place in it. And our interest is to make sure that our space in that community is not taken away or it's not trampled upon. But we also have to respect the other folks that are in that space as well. So there are certainly some people who either through misinformation or through bias maybe have some misconceptions, and it's our job to respectfully open those communication lines up and help them, as well as it is to help make sure that folks that are involved in our sport, either as a DZO or an SNTA or a pilot flying jump aircraft, to make sure they understand what their responsibilities are. So it's a two-way street. One of the things that Michael Knight does on a very regular basis is communicate between airport sponsors and either current or would-be drop zone owners who might be having mixed communications. And we can sometimes step in and get involved and help mediate those conversations and ensure that, the drop zone is doing the right thing and make sure the airport understands what their obligations are as well to allowing access to an airfield or airspace. The more we can do that, the better the relationship is. And we've tried to have better communications with them and keep those lines open, because ultimately they do look at our safety requirements. They look at our governance and they see that we truthfully take a lot of the brunt as a group, as a community, in keeping our airsport safe. And by doing so, it means they don't have to. Now, if we failed to do that job, then 1 + 1 = 2, and eventually someone would step in and either they would take on that role or they would just simply say, sorry, that activity is no longer permitted in the airspace. So someone would have to fill in that gap if it became unsafe for the rest of the users of our airspace system. So we maintain our place in that airspace system by doing the right thing and doing it with our interest in mind to make sure we can keep skydiving too.
It's a challenging balance, isn't it? Because the perception right away, if you have never been to a drop zone, whether you are just somebody off the street or someone in the FAA that deals with aviation but doesn't understand these crazy people, quote unquote, that jump out of airplanes. And it's interesting. I've been reading just this year articles from parachutists from the early 1960s, 62, 63, and you see the fight, or I've been reading about the fight sort of to prove to FAA or whatever they were called at that time, our credibility, that we are sane people just really enjoying life. And it's a tough challenge, I would imagine, for any executive director through history, you and all your predecessors, to continually be in the job of proving that we should have the right to share airspace and do it, with a level of safety, but, also fighting through that stereotype that, they're just a bunch of hippies jumping out of airplanes with no responsibilities. It's a tough line.
Sure. I mean, if you look back 40, 50, 60, throughout history, you can see the articles and those back issues of Parachutist that are on our website. You can see all the different battles and challenges that we as a community have gone through, and various executive directors and presidents of our board have led us through quite successfully, to the point that we are where we are now, and we're able to engage in the activity that we choose to and that we like to as part of the airspace system. And having looked at a lot of that and having read a lot of that and talked to the folks who were in those positions back then, I can very comfortably say that if skydivers of 70, 75 years ago didn't get together and form an association and work together, then we wouldn't be doing what we do here today. Without a doubt, I can say that with the utmost certainty, that if the people before us in this sport didn't take on the fights that needed to be fought, we wouldn't exist as a sport. Hands down, we wouldn't have over 200 drop zones in the United States for us to engage in recreational skydiving, or opening the skies up to people to make their first jump. Over 500,000 people make a tandem skydive every year and get to experience for the first time what we get to experience. And that's spectacular.
Albert, 1 hour has eviscerated.
Wow.
So I would just like that. I have so many more questions, but I think I will leave you with one. And more personally, your career path seems like everything that you did in your past, between living on a drop zone and working at a drop zone and understanding with true empathy what it's like to be a passionate skydiver and what people sacrifice in order to follow their passions. Then through meeting most everyone consequentially in skydiving, working for performance designs, to involvement casually, then more formally with USPA. Like, it's everything you've been doing seems to have been setting you up for this moment, this career, this responsibility. If you would, can you identify a crossroads moment where you said either yes or followed a path that, had you not done that, you are not sitting where you are today?
I'd say I've had a few of those in my life. I would say the first one is probably choosing to quit my job in New York and move to the DZ, and not knowing where it was going to lead. I'd say that was one. I'd say the second, which I think we talked about a bit, was deciding to take that job with PD. I'd say the next one in life has probably been my family, my wife and 2 kids, and the decision to go that route. A discussion, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, would I have said I'm going to be married with 2 kids living in a house in Virginia? Like, probably not. It would seem odd, and would I be here if I hadn't made that change in my life and, gone from hanging out at the drop zone late every night, drinking a lot, to, eventually having 2 kids, quitting drinking, enjoying having a wife and a full family. And it's funny, we have this conversation now, and it's a point in life, and we look backwards, and I can imagine having this conversation again 10, 15 years from now, and where will I be and what will I be doing? Will it be something different? And how will I reflect upon my spot in life now? But really, I think it's about just continuing to do what's right. Obviously, you make those calculations through life, but at the same time, you follow your heart a little bit. And if your heart tells you to go somewhere, but the numbers don't quite add up, but maybe they'll get there, then, maybe you take that little bit of a leap too.
Awesome. Albert, I'm grateful for your time and your leadership, as it is appreciated so much by so many of us. So in closing, it's really nice speaking with, and I think many would share this, to the executive director of our organization that understands the journey of the skydiver the instructor, sort of every aspect or avenue, having traveled to so many drop zones. Like in you, we have someone that has walked in the shoes of most everyone that is looking up to you for leadership. I just wish to share that I am grateful for the job that you're doing at USPA.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that. And I guess the biggest and easiest thing for me and the way I get through it every day is I don't think of myself as a leader, and I don't think of myself as an executive director, and I don't think of myself as some person on some kind of pedestal sometimes that it sometimes makes me uncomfortable, right? People think of me in that way, but I'm just another person. I'm one of 42,000 in our community, and I'm trying to do every day. I'm trying to do the right thing for our sport, for our community, and as long as I do that, I think that's the right thing. And as long as I keep doing that, I think we'll keep heading the right direction. And I'm the same guy. I get on a jump, I exit at the same altitude as everybody else. I go through the skydive the same way as everybody else. I laugh on the way down. I go low every once in a while, just like everybody else. And I have a good time and smile and laugh. So I'll keep doing that and appreciate having everybody else do it as well.
Thank you, Albert.
Thanks, James.
Pleasure.
Talk to you later.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.